Welcome back to another episode of our Hazel's Flight School Beer Edition. I'm Josh.
I'm Lily.
Today we're going to be looking into the wild world of yeast, what it is, what it does, and how we can taste it in our beers. So, first question, what is yeast? Yes, it's the same stuff that goes into making bread rise. A little bit different kind of yeast. With beer, we're going to be talking about a couple different kinds here. Yeast, what it does throughout our beer is essentially take all of those sugars that we got from our malts, from that mashing process, getting all of that sweet wort out of there, and then the yeast will start up the fermentation process. It's what will convert all of those sugars into alcohol, CO2, and as we'll see a little bit here, into some other fun molecules, other fun flavors that we can get out of our beer. So we are going to start with a just pretty simple Mexican style lager. What makes it Mexican style is usually the addition of corn, but what I want to focus on here is the lager portion of it. Lager being a specific type of yeast. Lager yeast will usually ferment cooler. It kind of subscribes to the low and slow method of fermentation. So it'll take its time, it'll work at a cooler temperature, kind of a calmer environment, and take its time eating through all of those sugars that it can over a much longer period of time, but to provide a cleaner, lighter bodied sort of beer in general. Like we'll see with this ratio. Just smells nice and clean. So the lager yeast won't be putting off a ton of aromatic molecules. It won't be producing this great bouquet that we'll see further down the line. It's just very simple, clean, and you can especially tell that once we get into the body of it and taste it. All right, so when you're tasting that, what do you feel?
It is exactly like you said. It's very clean. It's very light. I'm not getting a lot of bitter aftertaste. It's very, very drinkable.
Yeah. So yeah, that lager yeast will, here's a vocab word for you, it will attenuate better. So attenuation is how much of the sugars a certain yeast will eat out of the beer and convert that into CO2 and alcohol. So a higher attenuating yeast will make essentially a drier or a cleaner sort of beer. So you can definitely feel the attenuation here, that it gets all the other stuff out of the way and just leaves a cleanliness to it.
You know how sometimes people say, like, breakfast beer?
Or a shower beer.
Shower beer? Would
Yeah.
this be breakfast beer? Shower beer?
I would choose a stout for my breakfast beer, but yes, this could be a very easy drink and something that's not going to put you out first thing in the morning. It's very light, very clean, something that you can drink. The other term I've heard is like lawnmower beer. You're out in the hot, you're out in the sun. This beer, perfectly refreshing on a nice hot day. So going into our second beer is a Saison.
What makes a Saison a Saison?
Mostly the yeast. Starting from Belgium, Saison usually meaning season, brewed with stuff that was in season at the time, typically. But with the Saison, the driving factor for it is the yeast. So as opposed to the lager yeast that we had, ferments clean, doesn't put a lot of other stuff out. Saison yeasts also ferment at higher temperatures. This is one of those yeast you can ferment, some of them up to even 100 degrees. Most ale yeasts ferment right around room temperature, give or take 5 to 10 degrees. Lager yeasts will ferment usually around the mid 30s to low 40s in degrees. So Saisons, being that higher echelon, they can ferment 70, 80, sometimes up to 100 degrees. all of that warmth, all of that heat will provide action and energy for these yeasts. So they will rapidly ferment. They'll be very active, and they'll produce a lot of other chemicals that we'll find in this beer. But off the nose, first and foremost, just get that beautiful Saison bouquet. What do you get off of that?
It reminds me of being in a meadow during the summer when the sun is beating down and you can really smell all the flowers.
Yeah. And with this one in particular, too, the addition of chamomile to it definitely ups that floral aspect. You definitely get a rustic sort of feel out of it, for lack of a better term. It just feels homey, outdoorsy, like you said, out in the meadows, out in the fields. You're kind of away from the city. You're in the wild a little bit. Another thing I get is a bit of like clove or allspice. You get this lightly spicy kind of estery note out of it. And then when you go to the body of it, the palate, now on the body it changes a little bit, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What did you get more out of the palate, the mouthfeel to it?
More spice, a little more herb than I would have expected based on the smell.
Yeah, you get that Belgian Saison yeast, which can give you those herbaceous, those spicy, those really fun flavors to it. I also get like a little bit of maybe white peach, green apple, just this light underlying fruit to it. And of course that chamomile, just a wonderful, calming floral feel to it. Also with Saisons, typically, you get that super effervescence. You get that really bubbly character, hits your tongue, and just immediately explodes into bubbles. It's one thing that also makes Saisons really refreshing, great for a nice spring day, nice hot summer day. This hits the spot for sure.
With a beer like this where the producer is adding in an herbal element, is that literally like chamomile buds like added into the beer during the brewing process?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I can't speak to exactly when they would do this, but from my palate, I would say like the chamomile flowers, which is kind of atypical. The Saison wouldn't typically have flowers added to it. It's just a fun twist that they put on it. But I would say they probably add the flowers after fermentation or very close to that.
Mm-hmm.
They just want that flower to really, pardon the pun, but bloom into this beer. They really want to put that bouquet front and center of this beer, so they probably do it a lot later in the process. But moving on to another fun yeast experiment, we have a German style Hefeweizen.
What does that mean?
So Hef meaning yeast, typically. Weizen or Weiss or Weiss beer you'll see on some of these, meaning wheat or white. So referring to the yeast or to the wheat that they add into this, malted or unmalted, kind of depending on where they're going. But this one, you'll definitely tell.
Oh, that smells really good.
Yeah, it smells like a very spicy banana bread. You get, especially out of these German Hef yeasts, you can get bubblegum, banana, a really hearty clove to it as well.
I'm smelling orange.
And some orange too. That could be a little bit more from this brewery doing that. Maybe a little bit of their hop additions. They may be using some more American hops to give it that little bit of citrus, but it absolutely could come through some of the esters that are coming from this Hefeweizen yeast. Yeah, you get that just like, to me, like spicy banana bread or like a banana runts bubblegum.
Oh, maybe.
Then on the palate. Now on the palate, I don't know about you, but to me, that banana note really comes through.
Mm.
Just that banana, little bit of bubble gum, and again, just like the Saison we tried, good effervescence to it. Again, it just hits your palate and blossoms, just blooms into this great soft flavor to
I
it.
think the banana becomes even more apparent in the aftertaste.
For sure. I know with these yeasts in particular, breweries will kind of tailor it a little bit depending on where they want to go with it. Because maybe they don't want such a banana forward strain, or they do want that banana, maybe a little more clove, maybe a little softer side of things. So each of these different Hefeweizens, whether brewed in the US or Germany, will have some different notes of that to it. They'll have slightly different strains, slightly different uses for their yeast to kind of showcase that flavor profile that they're going for. And for those of you who say you don't like wheat beers, I would highly recommend trying a Hefeweizen to try and change your mind just a little bit on that. And last but not least, we have a sour rosé here. So rosé coming from the color, not necessarily from wine grapes. In fact, this is blueberries and raspberries. So it's going to be slightly different. We have the addition of fruit to it here, but
You can really smell the blueberry.
yeah. And then this one, in difference to the others, is using a sour yeast culture. So with that, you get that on the nose. Kind of that acidic, just put your nose in fresh lemon juice in a way. You just get this acid, sharp, tangy note to it. So much better than I remember it.
It's really good.
So yeah, on the palate, how does that sourness hit you?
It's tartar than I was expecting.
Yeah.
I thought it was gonna be more subtle. I thought it was gonna be fairly sweet blueberry, but instead you're really getting like very sour blueberry lemonade.
Yeah.
Even like some bitter notes in there as well, like fresh greenery type stuff. Yeah, really great.
Yeah, and where that comes through is it kind of tricks you on the nose, thinking, oh, I'm gonna get this fruity sweet beer, little acidity to it. On the palate, it flips it on its head. You get some of that acid. I get a little bit of funkiness out of it, to where you get like maybe a light brie or just a light funky cheese in a way, just where you get some of that acidity, that sour aspect to it, which can come from a number of different yeasts or bacteria used in the brewing process. A lot of the big sour elements are coming from Brettanomyces, being one of those. Heavily used. You'll also see Lactobacillus, which is one of the main bacteria in yogurt, for example. So you get a Greek yogurt, that tang that you get is partially from Lactobacillus. And you'll get things like Pediococcus, Acetobacter. You'll get some really funky wild bacteria and yeasts that aren't exactly showcased on their own all the time necessarily. But with that, you get this just nice mixture, this fun, tart, acidic flavor profile to it, but it's still agreeable, approachable. If you like a strong lemonade, not a ton of sweetness, like you were saying, this would be a good jumping off point for you. If you like that acid, some fruit juices, but want something not so sweet, great place to go for sure.
Yeah, this definitely tricked me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for taking a trip with us into this little overview of the wild world of yeast. Big shout out to Dylan Schwab with Crooked Stave Artisans. Thank you to Lily for being here on this trip with us. Thank all of you.
Come fly with us again next time. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Hazel's Beverage World, and ask your questions in the comment section.